So, the translations are out for My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 428, and let's just say that in this chapter, we finally have Uraraka confessing her feelings about what happened with Toga. Yeah, sorry, that's a little bit clickbaity, but we do get a fair amount of Uraraka feelings in this chapter, as well as unexpectedly focusing on the heroes doing heroics. That and more, I will talk about more in this review right now. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga Man Drew, and I'm here to do my manga review for My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 428, titled The Girl, or should I say, A Girl Who Loves to Smile. And with the title of this chapter, you can very much tell that this is going to be a Uraraka-centered chapter. Well, not exactly. This chapter isn't Uraraka-focused, but is setting up for a Uraraka-focused chapter that we're going to be getting next week, which is why I say that this is going to be her confessing her feelings, not necessarily for Deku, which it seems as if that's what we're building towards, but confessing her feelings about how she's been feeling after what happened with Toga. So we're diving into that, as well as just getting to see the kids or the students of 1A just doing, or should I say 2A, Class A, doing some more heroic stuff that we really didn't think that we were going to get in the epilogue, but we are. So let's dive right into the chapter and really talk about what's going on. And the chapter begins with Class 2A being introduced to the new first years. We do not know the exact year, or should I say we don't know exactly what class they're in, but most likely than not, we are learning that they are most likely in the hero course, just based off how they're looking, if not just in general studies. But whether or not they were in general studies or in the hero course, what is very interesting about them is their design and how they're being treated in this moment, with Ida pretty much chiding them, telling them that, yeah, y'all went a little bit overboard. Like, these two are still recovering and they're not very adept at communicating with a lot of people, so y'all need to be a little bit more considerate. And Ida is telling them this, and we see that they're a little bit disappointed and they want to apologize and feel sorry for what they've done, because they didn't know what they were doing was harming the people that they looked up to, where we learned that they looked up to both Bakugo and Shoto during the war and during a cultural festival, during sports festival, and how they just really wanted to get to know them more. And it leads to a fair amount of comedic scenes involving the new first years, but this is actually going to lead into something else that we're getting later on, with them potentially helping the heroes reconstruct society, as well as the civilians, emphasizing an important point that was pretty much shown within the war itself. But with that, we do get a fair amount of comedic scenes between Shinzo and the rest of the class, just seeing how his character dynamic would fit so well within Class 2A, as we see Mineta being himself and just going after Bakugo, saying that a delinquent like you shouldn't be this popular, just showing his jealousy, as well as the jealousy seen through Kaminari. So it's just a very cool, fun moment, but there is a shade of darkness in this moment, as we get one individual who specifically wants to see Deku and says how Deku inspired him to be just like him, as Deku thinks back to what Spinner says, and that this makes him feel uneasy. Most likely the idea and the image that he has portrayed to him, that the reasoning that he wants to be like Deku is what he saw in the war, and Deku very much sees the war differently than what everyone else sees, because they're seeing it from two different perspectives. One is seeing it directly in the actual action and knowing exactly what was happening with Tomura, while everyone else is looking at it from the onset, looking at it from the outside. So they may have seen Deku indirectly kill Tomura and think that, oh, Tomura's death was justified, that he should have died, and that's not the case with Deku. He feels very remorseful and just very heartbroken by the idea that he was unable to save Tomura's life, and that is why he's thinking about Spinner. So he has this weird feeling inside of him about what this individual says. But then we cut over to Uraraka as we get this running Japanese kanji or katakana that we see twice within the chapter, that is very much focused on Uraraka, and most likely the beginning indication that, as well as Deku hiding how he's feeling about this moment, Uraraka is also hiding it as well. And that's very interesting to see that these two characters in retrospect, are really feeling more like overwhelmed by their quote-unquote failures during the war in comparison to what we saw with the last few chapters with Todoroki, and how we saw his expression and how we thought that he was trying to cope or like fake this smile, but in actuality he was actually genuine because he was able to in a way save his brother Dabi, Toya. But we see that Deku and Uraraka are very much repressing and hiding their feelings from everyone else just because they were not completely successful and still have guilt for what happened during the war when it came to their respective villains. And this is very interesting. It really shows that they're hiding it, but there is something that I'm going to get to more later on in the chapter. But from here, this is where we get to see the students actively being heroes and not necessarily fighting the bad guys, but helping with the reconstruction of Japan. And something interesting is brought up is that people from the outside are wanting to talk more to 2A, but Aizawa is preventing that from happening. And he's preventing that from happening in respect to Aizawa, not because there aren't people who want to do that, but that there are people who completely don't want to do it, which is most likely hinting at Aizawa recognizing what's happening with Uraraka and Deku, because those are the characters that most likely are feeling the most guilt in this moment, and Aizawa is very much receptive to what is happening and how his students are feeling. So it's cool that we're bringing that up and how it pretty much builds upon the idea that both Uraraka and Deku have similar feelings from what happened to the war, but just tying more into the overall theme that we saw when it comes to just everyone helping out in the construction site. We have like a fair amount of individuals who come into this actual scene where we actually do get a hint and get to see Deku's new hero suit, and while not necessarily colored, is most likely respectively similar to either his like original design scheme or is going to take heavy inspiration from what he wore during the war. And as we get more cameos from characters such as Fat Gum as well as Best Jeanist, as they are dividing the students into different classes, and we learn a little bit more about what's happening with Tamaki, Sun Eater, we get a few scenes of the heroes actually being more rescue oriented, helping with the cleanup of this area, as we get to see that, unfortunately, depending on who you are, we get to see that Edgeshot is still very much alive. And this is going to lead to a fair amount of discourse, but we see Bakugo talking to Edgeshot and how he's asking if Edgeshot is stuck like this. And while Edgeshot is trying to dance around the situation, most likely than not, he is stuck in this little worm form, and that Bakugo questions if he's going to get back to normal, but he's going to strive to do even better and to go even further. And what's very interesting about this is that while yes, he is still alive, we have to take into account that while yes, he is alive, there is still a major consequence of what he did in the war. He is like a worm. He can't like be an active hero at the same level as he was prior to the war. He can't be like the Edgeshot that can just zip and weave through everybody because of his very much minimal size. And while yes, he does have hands, we have to realize that when it comes to consequences that happen to the characters are not always representative of like the character dying, but having lasting consequences, such as being just this miniature version of himself and not really able to help to the same extent. But also, the reasoning why he most likely exists is so that Bakugo doesn't have to hold on to any more guilt about a hero sacrificing themselves for him, or him being responsible for another hero's sacrifice, as we saw with how he felt with All Might. So it's very much more story oriented than actual stakes itself, but there are still consequences when it comes to Edgeshot's decision, and I do not think that it necessarily takes away strongly from his sacrifice to revive Bakugo during the war. But the reason why I bring up Edgeshot is that we do get to see the civilians taking a more active role in helping out the heroes by providing them food that they can be just sustaining their energy as they're helping out. As we have just one individual who's questioning Deku about how his plot of land was destroyed and how Deku thinks that he was unable to bring things back to normal. But the civilian as well as the students who are now first years come in and try to lift up the heroes by pretty much saying that, yeah, after what we saw during the war and seeing Deku and the others doing their best, it inspired them to do their best. And the same sentiment is said from the students brought here by some Mentos who also have that same narrative. And this idea of what did Deku show during the war is really being seen in this chapter. What Deku's shown is that even during like the gravest of situations, even when things are hitting the fan hard, that even if you are considered weak in that moment, if you still continue to fight, people will be inspired to do their best alongside you. That is something that heroes really didn't do. They inspired hope in others, but it didn't inspire the actual work ethic to help out, even if you believe that you don't have strength, even though you don't believe that you have power, because there are different ways to help. There are different ways to be heroic. That's why in this chapter, you don't see them fighting any heroes. You see them participating in like a sort of like cleanup duties and like providing support. They're all being heroic in this moment, but doing it in a different way, doing it in a heroic way that does not necessarily involve fighting. And this sentiment is very much shared with Uraraka about how everybody is being a little bit more optimistic. And what is very interesting about them saying that they need to do their best is that that is one of the first few things that Uraraka said to Deku, not only in the final war, but what Deku kind of means. It sounds like you can do it, you can do your best. And that makes sense because Uraraka was the one that gave Deku the new meaning or perspective to that name, which is by both him as well as Tsuyu look over to Uraraka and notice that she's acting extremely strangely. She's acting very distant and very unnatural when it comes to her cheery demeanor, as she's very happy about the food, as well as we get the second indication of that kanji or katakana, which is just telling off most likely for what we're getting at the end of the chapter, which is going to be Uraraka literally confessing how she's feeling to herself. But from there, we cut over it to it being nighttime, where it's revealed that none of the students have to necessarily stay in the dorms, that they can go home, but a lot of the students are choosing to stay in the dorms because that's where their friends are. That's where they've been for almost an entire year, so they probably feel more comfortable there. But we have Tsuyu, who's a little bit sad, questioning where Uraraka Ochako is because she's unable to get in contact with her. And the chapter pretty much comes to this conclusion where we get a slight flashback that reveals that everyone around the world did not see the sacrifice that Toga made, and how this is more or less a soft confirmation that Toga is in fact dead, as we have Uraraka just reflecting on the fact that the conclusion was not caught on camera because the camera battery died, and that everything is going back to normal, and that the darkness that was once like encompassing the world is now beginning to fade away, and that this is actually something that is going to be a good ending. But as this is all happening, you have her just thinking about how she loves to see people smile, but when she thinks about Toga, she thinks about how she doesn't want to like ruin the mood, and that she has been suppressing her feelings of this wound that she got from Toga and the pain, just really showing how the fact that she was unable to save Toga's life in that moment, and the fact that no one was able to understand that Toga risked her life to save her, that is something that the world will not see. She's the only one that knows that information, and it's just eating and eating and eating at her to the point where she continues to repress or suppress those emotions until she cannot hold them down anymore. She's unable to contain those feelings, and as she's about to break down and potentially use her quirk and to levitate an area that we've seen before, the area and cliff right next to where Troy is, Deku comes in with the chapter ending screaming Uraraka-san. So yes, as I said, we do not get a quote-unquote love confession of her feelings, but we do get to see how Uraraka is feeling in this moment, and we finally get to understand what she's feeling. That since the beginning of the epilogue up until now, we never really got a full grasp of how Uraraka is feeling at this moment. And now we're feeling her emotions, her grief, her sorrow, her pain over the fact that she was unable to save Toga's life, and that no one was able to see the sacrifice that Toga made, and that most likely than not, she may be afraid of the idea that the world is going to have this perspective of Toga that is going to be inaccurate, and she has no way of showing that proof to the world because it's going to be just based off her word and not evidence seen after those Toga clones faded. They may believe that she just defeated or killed Toga, but not that she was actually being heroic in a way that wasn't necessarily fighting or combative. She just treated Toga as a person, and that is something that the world won't see. And that this is going to bleed into most likely Uraraka and Deku having a conversation relating to how they're feeling in this moment, and potentially having Uraraka confess her love to Deku. This is pretty much the setup for the next chapter, where we're going to get the confession of Uraraka's feelings towards Deku, while this chapter is having Uraraka just confessing how she's feeling after the war. And overall, just that end part of this chapter was just really, really good. I really just loved how Horikoshi is representing Uraraka being torn up about what happened with Toga and how it has affected her throughout the entirety of the epilogue, as well as showing that it has affected her as much as it's been affecting Deku. As we see a little bit of that more towards the beginning of the chapter, and pretty much getting the resolution of some smaller plot beats, getting to get a little bit more interaction with the students of the new, most likely class 1A, as well as getting to see that the students are very much doing this not because of fame and popularity, but because this is the right thing to do as heroes. And just seeing this heroic moment of both the students, the first years, as well as the other heroes and civilians coming together and enabling the idea of doing your best is what Deku showed the world. That you can do your best no matter who or what you are, and that doing that most likely than not makes you a hero. All of this really encompassing the main themes of My Hero Academia, which is what it means to be a hero and what does it mean to save someone. Core themes that Horikoshi has been pushing throughout the entire series and are coming to a point right now with more to come. And I will say more about how I think the next few chapters are going to end, because the chapter kind of builds to an idea of what the last chapter is going to be, and I may make a video or do a live stream talking about that more in depthly. But overall, really enjoyed the chapter, thought this was an amazing chapter, very much made me cry towards the end just reading these translations. And let me ask you this, what did you think of the chapter? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? And would you have preferred seeing more of Uraraka confessing to Deku in this chapter, or are you willing to wait for the next chapter? Leave your thoughts down below, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content like this. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!